here to speak on a very important topic of diabetic retinopathy. India has now been regarded as the diabetes capital of the world. So as the incidence of diabetes is increasing on every passing day, so are the sequelae like diabetic nephropathy and retinopathy. Briefly run through the classification. Diabetes mellitus is a multisystem metabolic disorder which influences almost the functioning of every organ of the body. Classification, we can divide into primary and secondary forms. Primary we know are the insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus and non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. The secondary forms are can be caused because of pancreatic reasons, hormonal, drug-induced, insulin receptor abnormalities and certain genetic symptoms. Coming to the Indian scenario regarding the epidemiology of diabetic retinopathy, we have an estimated about 18 million diabetic population, of which around 80 to 85% of them have some form of retinopathy, which is around 12 to 16 million. Now, the natural course of the disease is dependent on the duration of the diabetes. You can see here that after 5 years of diabetes, IDDM patients, some 25% of IDDM patients will have some form of retinopathy. After 10 years, some 60% of IDDM patients, and after 20 years, almost 100% of IDDM patients have some form of retinopathy, and around 60% of NIDDM patients have some form of retinopathy. Again to see, after 15 years in type 1 patients, 80% have some retinopathy, of which 25% have already developed a proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And in type 2 patients, around after 25 years, 25% will have proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Now the risk factors, hyperglycemia is the single most important factor. We have seen the duration and the type of diabetes also affects the progression. Certain systemic factors like onset at puberty has a bad prognosis. It has also been seen that a very rapid improvement of glycemic control results in an initial worsening of the disease. Hypertension, pregnancy, nephropathy causes worsening of diabetes, so is delayed lipid profiles. Certain ocular factors like glaucoma causes worsening of diabetes, retinopathy. However, myopia has some protective effect. And certain genetic factors like DR4 and DR3 causes increased progression of diabetic retinopathy. The pathogenesis is basically single most important thing is microangiopathy, which affects every organ of the body in diabetes, and so retina is also no exception to this. However, every cell lines of the body are affected. Every cell line of the retina is actually affected. It has two basic features, that is this microangiopathy. There is microvascular leakage and microvascular occlusion. Microvascular leakage is due to loss of pericytes which surround the capillary endothelial cells. Because of the loss of pericytes, the capillary walls bulge and distend, and they may also break, and there is also a break in the blood-retinal barrier. This gives rise to all the clinical manifestations. You can have microaneurysms, which are some outpouchings of the capillary walls, retinal hemorrhages of various types, retinal edema, which could be diffuse and localized, and hard exudates, which are as a result of exudation of serum lipoproteins from these leaky vessels. And microvascular occlusions, this is present. There is thickening of basement membrane which occurs in several organs in diabetes. There is endothelial damage, there is RBC deformation, there is platelet aggregation, and all this causes the capillaries to occlude, as a result of which the retinal perfusion gets hampered and there is retinal ischemia. And wherever there is a retinal ischemia, which is a very powerful stimulus for neovascular growth. And so there is neovascularization of various types which occur, resulting in neovascularization of the disc, neovascularization elsewhere, neovascularization of the iris. There is opening up of arteriovenous shunts and intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. We will describe each of these in details subsequently. This is a pictographic picture of the same thing that we talked about. Another important thing, there are several causes of pathogenesis. Another important thing which is coming up is the role of VEGFs in the development of diabetic retinopathy. These are vascular endothelial growth factors, which is normally present in the eye for its normal growth. However, in diabetic patients, the vitreous samples were analyzed and it was found that their VEGF levels are much more than the non-diabetic patients. Now, vascular endothelial growth factors are produced by microglial cells in response to increased blood sugar and hypoxia. This leads to increased capillary permeability and endothelial proliferation, so that we can have neovascularization and several other features of clinical features of diabetic retinopathy. Now, anti-VEGFs, monoclonal antibodies like recently the Lucentis and Avastin and Macugen are being increasingly used nowadays for the treatment and management of diabetic retinopathy. Coming to these clinical signs which we talked about, the microaneurysms are the earliest signs. Their size usually range from 12 to 100 microns. However, they are as small as the size of a pinhead, red small spots in the size of a pinhead. However, only 30 those are which are 30 microns in size, greater than that, are visible clinically. They are best picked up. They can be seen clinically, but they are best picked up in a fluorescent angiogram. This is a fundus picture of the right eye of a patient with in the fluorescent angiogram. You can see these white dots, small tiny dots. These represent the microaneurysms. Then intraretinal hemorrhages. Intraretinal hemorrhages. Any red spot which is more than 100 microns can be considered as hemorrhage. The types of hemorrhages vary according to the depth in which they occur, and the shape also varies. There can be superficial types of hemorrhages which are flame shaped and present in the nerve fiber layers. And deep hemorrhages are dot and blot hemorrhages which are in the outer plexiform or inner nuclear layers. These are flame shaped hemorrhages. These are in the nerve fiber layers which are superficial. Whereas you can see these are the dot and blot hemorrhages which are actually in the deepest plane. Hard exudates, these are yellowish waxy in appearance. They are sharply defined margins. They are actually made up of these serum lipoproteins which exudate from these permeable vessels. These you can see they are yellowish structures, very small ones, and the margins are well defined. Soft exudates, these also called cottonwool spots. They are greyish white patches with fuzzy margins and they are infarcts of the nerve fiber layer. These are small hard exudates. You can note this and these. These two are patchy and they have a fluffy margin which is indistinct. These are cottonwool spots. Venous bleeding. They represent venous dilatation. The veins of the retinal vasculature appear beaded, and sometimes they may even be looped. And they are seen in areas of capillary non-perfusion where there is no vascular supply. We talked about intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. In diabetic retinopathy, there is a change in the vascularity of the capillary bed, and this leads to this dilatation of the capillaries and opening up of arteriovenous shunts, causing this irma to get formed. Some even regard these as early retinal neovascularization. These are venous bleeding and venous loops, and this is an irma. Coming to neovascularization, there are two forms: neovascularization of the disc and neovascularization elsewhere. Neovascularization of this is a fundus picture of a patient, the right eye of a patient. Now this is the disc, these are the vascular arcades, and this is the macula. Neovascularization, this could be any new vessel formation on the surface of the disc or within one disc diameter. One disc diameter is roughly around the size of disc, an area like this. Anything which is within this one disc diameter would be a neovascularization of the disc, and any other neovascularization somewhere else other than this place would be a neovascularization elsewhere. Coming to the classification, the EVA-CONUS classification which was previously used, they divided diabetic retinopathy into background diabetic retinopathy, proliferative retinopathy, and pre-proliferative retinopathy and proliferative retinopathy. And maculopathy was a separate entity. However, presently the ETDRS classifications are being used after the recommendations of the trial, the early treatment of diabetic retinopathy study. This is the current classification which is being used. Here the diabetic retinopathy has been divided into two major types: the non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy and proliferative diabetic retinopathy. The non-proliferative variety can be divided into mild, moderate, severe and very severe forms. We'll come to each of them later. And proliferative diabetic retinopathy is again early type and proliferative diabetic retinopathy with high risk criteria. Now superadded on this, any of this retinopathy can be complicated with a condition called CSME, which is clinically significant macular edema. So it's a maculopathy which can be superimposed on any of these retinopathy, which has to be separately mentioned in any of the clinical scenarios. Now mild non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, we will have presence of microaneurysms, we will have mild and moderate intraretinal hemorrhages in less than 4 quadrants. Retina can be divided into 4 quadrants based on the vascular arcades, and we can calculate the hemorrhages in the quadrant, and in case of mild and PDR we will base mild and moderate hemorrhages in less than 4 quadrants. You can have hard exudates, you can have macular edema which can complicate any of the retinopathy, and foveal avascular zone abnormalities. There is a small area within the macula which is one of the most light sensitive areas, that's called the fovea, and this region is actually avascular. There is no capillary supply, which results in the high light sensitivity of this area. Now in case of usually it is around 300 to 700 microns in size, but in diabetics because of capillary non-perfusion, this foveal avascular zone is increased. There is ischemic region in this place, and these abnormalities can be best picked up on fluorescein angiogram. Moderate NPDR will have cottonwool spots, intraretinal hemorrhages in 4 quadrants, venous bleeding and intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. Severe and very severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, this is a 4-to-1 rule that we call. If you have any one of these 3 features, then it is a severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. If you have 2 of the above criteria, then it becomes a very severe form of non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. In the 3 clauses are the very severe intraretinal hemorrhages in 4 quadrants, venous bleeding in 2 quadrants, and moderately severe intraretinal microvascular abnormalities in 1 quadrant. If you have one of them, it is severe, and if you have 2 of them, it is very severe. Then coming to proliferative retinopathy, here the neovascularization has already set in. You have neovascularization of the disc, neovascularization elsewhere. Now these new vessels, they usually get broken and there are hemorrhages. We can have pre-retinal hemorrhages, vitreous hemorrhage, traction retinal detachments, all are sequelae of these. And you can also have neovascularization of the iris. Iris an angle. If you have these features, then straight away the retinopathy becomes a proliferative retinopathy. We talked about the high-risk criteria. High-risk criteria have 3 clauses. If it is not present, then it is an early proliferative diabetic retinopathy. If you have these features, then it becomes a high-risk proliferative diabetic retinopathy with high-risk criteria. Then here, the neovascularization of the disc is present. The size has been specified, at least 1/3 to 1/4 of disc area in extent. Here, this is the disc. You can see new vessels in the superior and medial aspect. They are probably more than 1/4 of the disc area. So this becomes a high risk criteria this patient has. The neovascularization of the disc, any neovascularization disc, if it is complicated with pre-retinal and vitreous hemorrhage, it is also high risk criteria. If you have a neovascularization elsewhere somewhere here, which is half the disc area, or it is complicated with retinal or vitreous hemorrhage, then also it is a high risk criteria. Now coming to traction retinal detachment, as this neovascularizations progress, they actually contract and pull the retina, and resulting in localized detachment. Here you can see severe fibrovascular proliferation has occurred. They have distorted the retinal vasculature, and they are putting a traction on the retina. You can appreciate a localized retinal detachment here, and this has become a traction retinal detachment. This is some of the sequelae we can have of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Coming to maculopathy, it is the single most important cause of visual impairment in a diabetic, particularly in NITDM patients. There can be several types of maculopathy. One is the focal. Here there is a localized area of the fovea in which there is retinal edema or there is leaky capillaries. The diffuse variety, there is a generalized leakage from dilated capillaries. In ischemic variety, there is capillary non-perfusion. The macular area is non-perfused by capillaries and hence results in ischemic maculopathy. and a combination of these results in the mixed variety. Then CSME, very important definition, clinically significant macular edema. Because this is important because only if the maculopathy is clinically significant do we go for lasers and treatment, otherwise simple follow-up is recommended. Now there are 3 clauses in the definition, we will describe each of them. If it is there is a retinal thickening at or within 500 microns from the foveal center. Now here you can see this is the center of the macula and this is 500 microns from the center of the macula area. If there is a thickening in this place, then it is a CSME. Hard exudates at or within 500 microns of the foveal center if associated with adjacent retinal thickening. This is a 500 microns from the center of the macula, there are hard exudates but there is no retinal thickening. However, there is an adjacent retinal thickening here. So this also becomes a clinically significant macular edema. And third is that any area of retinal thickening greater than 500 microns, 1500 microns in size, some part of which is within 1 disc area from foveal center with or without hard exudates. This is the 1 disc diameter from center of the macula. This is a large area of thickening, a part of which is within this area. So this is also a clinical significant macular edema. If you have a maculopathy which is not fitting into any of these 3, then it is not clinically significant and only follow-up is recommended. Coming to the investigations, we go for ocular examination, ocular investigations and systemic investigations. Ocular examination, the visual acuity of the patient is assessed, the intraocular pressure is done, the anterior segment is watched with focus on the iris. The iris is seen in high magnification. If there is a neovascularization, to see whether there are neovascularizations in the iris. The dilated funduscopy is done in all the cases. We can see the fundus with a direct ophthalmoscope, with a slit lamp biomicroscope, with a 90 diopter lens or any contact lens, or with an indirect ophthalmoscope. Here we should appreciate that these 2 are the gold standards for the fundus examination diabetic retinopathy, because we are examining it first with slit lamp biomicroscopy and indirect ophthalmoscope. We get a 3-dimensional picture of the retina because we are using both our eyes for seeing. So we can appreciate any retinal thickness, whereas in the direct ophthalmoscope usually the sense of depth is missing because we are seeing through one eye. So these 2 are the we should examine with these 2. Then we can also go for a fundus photography. Other investigations, we can go for fundus fluorescein angiography. Now the OCT for assessing the macular status has come up. Ultrasound B scans can be done when there is a media, say there is a dense cataract or vitreous hemorrhage and we cannot see the fundus, then we can go for this ultrasound B scan. Now all cases do not read a fluorescein angiogram, only in special cases. There are few indications in which we go for fundus fluorescein angiogram, in which we inject a dye intravenously called fluorescein and then we get the fundus pictures. Here the indications are if there is a macular thickening, to distinguish whether it is because of a diffuse leak or a focal leak, because the treatment plan would change. If this maculopathy that we have is because of ischemic maculopathy, it's very difficult to pick up clinically an ischemic maculopathy. To differentiate pseudophakic macular edema from diabetic macular edema. Pseudophakic in certain cataract patients we have, after the cataract surgery we can have macular edema. So that is very difficult to distinguish from diabetic macular edema. So this can be, fluorescein angiogram can be used. To follow photocoagulation patients who have already undergone laser photocoagulation, the following up can be done by FFA. And to distinguish between intraretinal microvascular abnormalities from NVE. Sometimes it is very difficult to clinically distinguish between a NVE and an IRMA because they look pretty similar. So it can be, a fluorescein angiogram can be done, and NVE would leak very profusely in the late phases, whereas an IRMA do not leak. We are not going to these details, just the pictures. Capillary non-perfusion areas in fundus fluorescein appears like these. This is a fundus fluorescein angiogram of a patient. You can note these jet black areas. These are the areas where there is no capillary supply and hence it's appearing black. These are the areas where, so this patient has a macula which is ischemic. Now NVD, we have seen that there is a large preretinal hemorrhage with some vessels here. After fluorescein angiography they appear like these. This is how they leak after in the neovascularizations leak in the fluorescent angiogram. This is a NV. It was appearing clinically. A fluorescent angiogram was done. Here is how it is leaking. So this is been confirmed that this is a neovascularization elsewhere. You can see these are the microaneurysms. And this is the fundus picture of another patient. This patient had an NVD, large NVD, and several NVEs. Now we talked about macular edema from a cataract surgery and diffuse leak from in CSME. This is a macular edema which developed in a patient of after cataract surgery. Note that this is a typical petalloid appearance, like a flower. Whereas in case of CSME, there is macular thickening and there are leaks from microaneurysms which is diffuse. So this is very easy, with a fluorescent angiography it is very easy to distinguish. Coming to optical coherence tomography, this is an investigation which is based on laser interferometry. Here infrared rays are passed to the eye and based on interference pattern we get a histological, like a cut section of the retina. Here this is how a normal macula would look with a nice foveal depression. Note the 3 cases in which there was macular edema in a diabetic patient. The first case, there is a large cystic space and there is fluid in the intraretinal layers. In the second one, there is a this is the retinal pigment epithelium layer and this is the rest of the retina which has been separated by fluid. So there is a neurosensory detachment here. The third one here this is the posterior vitreous phase, also called the hyaloid phase. So this in some diabetics there is a taut posterior hyaloid phase. Now this is putting a traction on the macula and has lifted it up and causing edema. Now in this patient, this traction element has to be removed by surgery. Otherwise, we won't have this edema will not subside. Now, basic approach for any non-communicable disease, we can go for a primary prevention for avoidance of diabetics and health education. And secondary prevention is early diagnosis and treatment and controlling of the risk factors, and tertiary prevention of rehabilitation. Management, we can screen and follow up the patients, general management of the metabolic condition, management of NPDR, management of PDR and macular edema. When do we do a fundus examination? The first examination in case of type 1 patients after 5 years of onset or at puberty. In type 2 patients, whenever the diagnosis is made immediately fundus examination has to be done. And minimal follow-up, if the fundus first fundus picture is normal, you can go for an annual follow-up. But however, if the first examination is not normal, then it is recommended depending on the stage of the retinopathy. Follow-up here, you can note that if there is no retinopathy, there is an annual follow-up. If there is retinopathy, we categorize whether it is proliferative or non-proliferative. In proliferative, we treat and follow up every 2 to 3 months. In non-proliferative variety, we categorize whether it is mild, moderate, severe or very severe. If there is no macular edema, then it is an annual follow-up in mild. If there is macular edema but that is not clinically significant, you can go for a 4 to 6 months follow-up. And if there is clinically significant macular edema, we treat and we follow up the patients in 2 to 4 months. In moderate one, you can see it is a 6 months follow-up. If there is no macular edema but not clinically significant, it is a 4 to 6 months follow-up. And in CSME again, it is 2 to 3 months follow-up. In very severe forms, if there is no macular edema, the follow-up is more stringent. It is at 3 to 4 months. And if there is macular edema, it is 2 to 3 months. In the very severe form, whatever be the retinopathy status, it is a 2 to 3 months follow-up, because these are the patients who is likely to progress very rapidly to the proliferative variety. The GL metabolic control, there are several studies, of which the 2 most important is the DCC diabetes control and clinical trial, which was done in IVDDM patients, and the UKPDS trial, which was done in NIDDM patients. In the first one, they took IDDM patients and did a very strict control of sugar, and what they found was that when there was no retinopathy initially, 76% reduction was there in a strict sugar control. If the patient had an existing retinopathy, 54% reduction in the progress. And in NIDDM patients, 25% reduction in the progression of retinopathy with a strict glycemic control, and 35% reduction in the risk of microangiopathy for every point in reduction of glycosylated hemoglobin. Here is where the importance of glycosylated hemoglobin comes. Glucose control we all know about, but what is important as diabetic retinopathy is concerned is the glycosylated hemoglobin. The target is usually kept at around less than 7%. The patients are followed up, and this is the target that we recommend. Hypertension, again the UKPDS trial, they found that a tight blood pressure control versus a less tight blood pressure control. They found that the tight variety, there was a 34% reduction in the progression of retinopathy. So definitely control of hypertension in a patient of diabetes would help in its lesser progression. Hyperlipidemia, yes, elevated serum cholesterol is actually associated with increased levels of exudation or hard exudate formation, and also there is an increased risk of developing of high risk PDR. Laser treatments, one is the classical indications we have and some of the special situations. Classical situations, this was first is the proliferative diabetic retinopathy with high risk criteria. The recommendations are in the diabetic retinopathy study. We straight away do a pan-retinal photocoagulation of these patients. And in from the recommendations of the ETDRS study, CSME, if we get a patient of clinically significant macular edema, we do a focal or a grill laser. The special situations in which even in NPDR patients we go for laser. Pregnant female ladies with diabetic retinopathy, it leads to worsening of diabetes, so we can go. If a diabetic who is likely to undergo cataract surgery, we really don't do this nowadays. Third is one-eyed patient with diabetic retinopathy. The other eye has been lost because of diabetic, and fourth is the non-compliant patients. This is a summary of the already what we have discussed. If a mild NPDR, if there is no CSME, we don't treat. If there is CSME, yes, we treat with focal laser. Moderate NPDR also we do not do anything. Only if there is a CSME we treat. In severe NPDR, certain special cases we treat. And CSME obviously in any of the cases we will treat. And in PDR, we have already talked. Laser procedures.